camera modes like manual, panorama, HDR, and time-lapse, each of which works fairly well. In this image, the panorama mode did an excellent job with stitching, for example. Not all the results were perfect, as you can see in this image, but the mode does very well overall. There's also a wide aperture mode, which adds artificial background blur up to f/0.95. It's really fun to play around with, and you can definitely get a more artistic shot when using it. With that said, it often stumbles in correctly isolating the foreground and lower contrast scenes like this one. Although there is an HDR mode manually selectable from the menu, I actually didn't notice much of a difference when using it. That's probably because the normal automatic mode already provides more than enough dynamic range. Switching over to the photos taken in auto mode, you can see just how well the cameras on the Honor 8 are able to balance the highlights and the shadows. For example, while the sky here is just a tad overexposed, the statue in the center is surprisingly well detailed. Contrast is pretty good too, across the board, and the phone seems to do well with color saturation. Images aren't really oversaturated, but they're still fairly punchy. Overall, the Honor 8's camera captures great stills and good lighting. Here are some more general camera samples taken with the Honor 8. Unfortunately, video recording just isn't up to par with competing options. Whereas most others go up to 4K at 30 frames per second, the Honor 8 is limited to 1080p 60p capture. Colors are pretty muted as well, and the software processing can sometimes mix up the white balance mid-shot, which definitely doesn't look good. There also isn't any optical image stabilization, so it can sometimes be tricky to get a steady shot. Low-light performance is surprisingly strong here when compared to other affordable flagships, despite some noticeable noise in dim conditions. Colors are also expectedly less punchy and more muted, but there is still a fair bit of contrast in many shots. Detail can be hit or miss in low light and depends largely on how steady you hold the phone when taking the shot. In an effort to compensate for the lack of light, the Honor 8 selects a slower shutter speed, which means the sensor gets exposed for a longer period of time. But once you minimize camera shake, you can almost always get a decent shot. While the Honor 8's camera isn't as impressive in low light compared to other phones like the Galaxy S7, it's important to consider Honor's competitive pricing. Perhaps the most impressive aspect here is how Honor was able to largely avoid compromising camera performance at the phone's affordable price. If you'd like to learn more about the Honor 8, be sure to check out our full